Hey, Steve.
Any new members of our Insider Club this week?
Why, yes, thanks for asking. Lucas Peterson has joined the ranks. Welcome, Lucas, and thank you.
Insiders enjoy several benefits. Chief among them is the satisfaction of helping us continue this podcast for just $5 a month.
The info is on our homepage at musicatinsights.com, but let's get to our guest.
Yes, let's. Author and classroom management expert Michael Linsin is back.
Just last week, as a part of our summer reading, we talked about his blog post, The Big Lie of Childhood Trauma, and we thought it would be good to invite him to the conversation.
We are so glad he took us up on that. Thank you, Michael. Welcome back to the program.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, so obviously we encourage all of our listeners to check out last week's episode as well as your blog post. In the event that they haven't, can you give us a quick summary of The Big Lie of Childhood Trauma?
Basically, it was that social emotional learning that's being pushed in the classrooms increasingly more and more every day, every year is bad for kids. I believe in the short and long term and does more harm than it does good.
And what has the feedback been from your blog readers in the comments? What are you noticing?
I think it's mostly positive. But we don't, at Smart Classroom Management, we don't approve mean-spirited comments. And so we've, to be honest, gotten quite a few of those as well.
I think that the comments that resonated with me the most were the ones that were saying, hey, SEL, social emotional learning, also believes in consistency and building resilience. So please, everybody, remember that in our quest to help build strong students, we can incorporate some elements of SEL as long as we still remember that a part of it is consistency in helping students build resilience. And a big part of that is really clear and high and consistent expectations.
It's a good point. I did see that. However, I don't think that's the message that anyone is getting.
Okay.
Any teacher is getting. Very, very, very few teachers are getting that message. That's not being communicated, that part of it. If it were, then maybe I wouldn't have written the article. Mm-hmm. I don't think a lot of people that are saying it, talking about social emotional learning, believe that. I think they're receiving the message that it's the opposite, that we need to remove rules and high expectations and standards and such. I think that's the message that's being received. And it's certainly what's going on in practice in the classrooms. Absolutely, 100%.
And when you talk about what you're seeing in practice in the classrooms, is this based on feedback from colleagues, things you are witnessing firsthand? I'm curious sort of what caused you to sit down, inspired you to sit down and start writing this. Was it something you saw or some anecdotes from people?
Mainly what I'm seeing myself and experiencing through teaching and through 33 years of teaching, and then the increase in this sort of approach and philosophy toward kids that's only increased since COVID, since the pandemic. But it's also talking to people. I do a lot of personal coaching with teachers, and I'm in contact with teachers all the time, and get lots of comments via social media and of course in the blog post. So it's there also, but it's mainly me being in the arena and watching it happening. And then of course, hearing all the complaints about misbehavior and the increase in misbehavior and the frustration teachers are feeling over not being able to have deadlines for grades and having minimum grades, the teachers saying they have to give 50%, even if a student does nothing, that sort of thing. And then just the misbehavior, often dangerous misbehavior, and then having the student right back in their classroom. And I've seen and experienced that personally and have watched and been with teachers where that's happening too. So in the moment, and dramatic increase in that just the last couple of years.
Is there a world where a teacher has a very solid understanding of SEL and is implementing it properly, and it could be an okay thing in your eyes? I'm still kind of trying to figure out, is the problem with SEL in and of itself, or is it people cherry picking parts of SEL and that has created sort of a misinterpretation of what it means? And now here we are.
Well, I think it's a bit of both. And I think that there's the way SEL is communicated, and that these are the strategies that we need to use for these students. And then it's not just the SEL specifically, but it's a lot of this kind of accompanying things, the community circles and the counseling sessions and the mental health breaks and all this kind of stuff, which I'm not even sure if that was ever part of SEL, but it's all sort of lumped together in lowering standards. And in my view, communicating to students that the normal obstacles of life, that they're not capable of handling them.
Yeah.
And so they need a lowering of standards, and essentially telling students that they're not good enough, they're not mentally strong enough, and they need all of this support. They need standards lowered. They need excuses that the behavior isn't their fault. It's because that they've been through something difficult. And I'm not downplaying those difficult things that happen in life at all, and some worse than others. And I'm just saying that in the long run, that hurts them rather than helps them.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we're throwing a lot of terminology around and using a lot of examples. But let's not lose your basic point, which is we need to build strong students. There are things that are happening right now that are keeping us from students being their best. They stop believing in themselves and their ability to overcome when we don't let them overcome, right? Like, that's the main point that we don't want to lose.
Absolutely. We're not doing students any favors, no matter what they've been through. And we can certainly come alongside and say we understand, but they've got a whole life to live, and we're preparing them for the future and preparing them to have opportunities to make the decisions about their life. And we're shrinking those opportunities rather than expanding them. And they need to be able to read and write and communicate regardless. Not only that, is when we raise standards on those things and we teach students that we believe in them by our high standards and expectations, by holding them to a higher standard, we're telling them we believe in you. And kids crave this, by the way, anyway. It's natural. They're looking for leadership. They're looking for something to shoot for, some goals. Sometimes it's buried deep inside, and we have to pull it out of them. We have to stimulate that intrinsic motivation. And we're just doing the opposite. And we're weakening kids rather than strengthening them.
The thing that I want to return to social emotional learning as a concept, I've not been in the classroom day to day for the last 11 years. I have worked with students on a regular basis, but not in the classroom as a teacher. I'm under the impression that social emotional learning is, at its heart, a focus on helping people understand and regulate their emotional reactions to things. That's what I thought SEL, what the origin of SEL was. And I'm all in favor of that, because when I do corporate training with leaders who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, so many workplace problems happen because people don't manage or notice their own emotional reactions to things and respond in an irrational way. I'm talking like, even executive level people. So the idea of helping students understand and regulate emotions, I'm all on board with that. If then I am told it's all about telling students they're not good enough and they're broken and they can't achieve anymore, so let's lower the standards, then you lose me. I think that there can be reasons that students aren't meeting a standard, and some of those reasons are potentially trauma informed, and some of them aren't. But then we get to know the whole student and then help them do whatever it takes to overcome that without saying, yeah, you're broken and you probably can't, so we're not going to hold you to the standard.
Setting aside whether that's something that can be taught from the outside, or rather those are lessons learned from the inside based on having a strong teacher with good leadership skills and good teaching skills. Because our job is to motivate, to work hard, to experience success, to be noted for that success, I think does far more than trying to teach from the outside, which I'm not sure is effective or not. But I don't have any problem with that. I totally get what you're saying, and I agree with the sentiment for sure. But that's not what's being pushed in the schools. And the other thing is time is also a factor. Training is also a factor. Our counselors aren't even really psychologists, school psychologists especially, they're not really trained in therapy anyway. I know, I went through the program. My master's is in counseling. And then you can go even deeper to ask whether and to the extent therapy is effective. But when we have 30 students in the class and a teacher is trying to, it's not possible to do this individually. And so to have a circle up as a group and have us pass a frog around, a stuffed frog around, when we should be working on academics, to pass a frog around and to share out something that is causing pain in their life, where kids are looking for ways to do that, and to focus on that pain can often bring more of it. And again, I just think that emotionally, kids are doing better when they're overcoming, learning how to overcome, learning those lessons of, like you said, emotionally controlling themselves, and these kinds of things happen through experience rather than being told and taught these things. And again, even if they're told and taught these things, well, who's teaching it and how are they trained? And what's the proof that it actually works?
That's a great point. I'm thinking about just the time, both the contact time we have with the students and then also our own time in professional development. And I think a lot of districts and schools and leadership will take the approach of, oh, SEL, this is a good thing. This research says it's a good thing, therefore we need to do it. And the way we're going to do it is in the 2 days leading up to the start of school. In addition to all the other stuff you're going to do, we're going to have 1 half-hour meeting on this. And then the takeaway is you need to do circles where you pass the frog around and basically lower your standards. And that sort of is the takeaway, because there just isn't time to learn how to do it properly. Like you said, if even the school counselors are not trained to give individual therapy to the students, well, certainly us teachers, we don't have that training and we don't have the time. And so we just get this sort of watered down approach to SEL where that isn't even what we are doing.
Yeah, and many teachers think they do. They think that they just talking it out, that somehow that's helping students, and they're wrong about that. In many ways, it's dangerous, and they're getting into some dangerous things that they don't really understand what they're doing. And then if you juxtapose that community circle example with a student working hard in a goal-oriented way, improving their ability using an instrument or their voice, or the joy of music and the joys of those things and the messages and the lessons of that discipline and the joy that comes through that can help them overcome, I argue, far greater than kind of this do-gooder, soft baby food that I think doesn't help anyone, that wastes time, hurts kids. We think we're doing good by lowering standards and telling them, well, they can't do it because they've been through so much. I'm not exaggerating. That's what's happening largely in many of the schools. You know, I'm thinking about these things all the time and looking at these things all the time. And so I think that maybe pointing them out, I think will maybe get teachers to start seeing things a little differently. And maybe when they start the school year, they can see this happening and recognize, oh, okay, I see this happening and I can see that this isn't good.
I'm going to share a worry with you. My worry is that people will read the headline, The Big Lie of Childhood Trauma, and then they'll see the apex of your blog, which says, throw out SEL and all of its manifestations. And they won't read all the other stuff. And they won't look at the subtleties of smart classroom management. And they won't hear you talk about how teachers never yell, use sarcasm, or single out students. Like, they'll miss all of that. And they'll just be like, yeah, this expert on classroom management is with me. Kids are too soft. We need to go old school.
Yeah.
And that is not what you're saying,
No.
because smart classroom management is you're a consistently pleasant teacher who never yells, uses sarcasm, or singles out students. At the same time, you provide consistent daily routines and procedures, explicitly taught expectations that are consistently held to, and conveying to every student who doesn't meet the expectations, I believe you can do it. And that is why I won't stop until you do it, because I care about you. So I just worry that somebody will read it and only get validated for their desire to go old school.
This is my constant worry for 15 years. And I understand because sometimes I can come across pretty strong, especially this particular conversation. But you're absolutely right, is that some will take that. And it is a worry of mine also, to mean that we are an old school football coach.
Or band director.
Yeah, they're just as bad.
I
The
know they
old
are.
school band directors will swear just as much, and yeah.
I know they are. I
Yeah.
know they are.
Yeah.
They're old football coaches of another form for sure.
Well,
So yeah, absolutely. So I say often, but should say it again, that we're all about kindness and joy and love of learning and friendships and strong leaders and gentleness and doing things the right way and responsibility and kindness and all those kinds of things, which really, I think that is a bit opposed. All those things I just said are, when it comes down to it, are opposed to social emotional learning, because we have kids that are throwing chairs in class and told, well, it's not your fault, but what about the rest of the kids? Or the bullying, and then making the kid being bullied have to sit with the kid bullying him, and kids getting bullied, and then the bullies are just, they're empowered because, well, he or she's been through a lot. So that was a great point. Yeah, I worry about that too. And I there's quite a few of my blog posts that I see the comments. I'm like, oh my gosh, please read the article.
if people want to follow your advice and try to pick and choose, we need to counsel them against that and say instead, head over to www.smartclassroommanagement.com and pick up one or two of Mr. Linsin's books and read it cover to cover.
Yeah, just a reminder to the listeners, I use classroom management for art, music, and PE teachers in my undergraduate courses. It's by far probably the best for the money book that I make the students buy. And it's one of the few that I say, and don't sell this one back. You're going to want this one when you actually start teaching here in a few years.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really do think the approach is about love and kindness and what's best for kids long term. I think that's really critical. And I do understand wanting to have SEL, and I do understand that, but I think it's gone too far. And I'm certainly not saying that if a student experiences some trauma, and teaching as long as I've had students, I've gotten to school in the morning and heard about awful events, and the student is right there in your classroom. Certainly not saying that there are times when they need to talk about things and talk about issues, and there are kids and times that we need that, but to have a kind of a broad brush approach, and that to, even with that student, lowering standards for that particular student is not the best thing for that student that goes through those tough things.
In that instance, is there a scenario where Mr. Linsin might give a student in a very special circumstance a mental health break or a second chance or whatever? We're saying don't apply this big picture to the whole of your teaching, but are there individual cases where you could see this student just went through this awful thing yesterday or recently, and I'm going to maybe approach this student just a little bit differently?
Sure. A student says to me, Mr. Linsin, I've been through this situation or whatever, and I'm kind of out of sorts. Is there a way, can I get up and walk out for a couple minutes? And I'll say, well, where specifically, where you're going to be, et cetera. I'm responsible for you. But yes, of course, we're still human beings, and if there's the 504 says that I need to follow, I'm going to follow that. I'm also going to try to wean them off those things, though. That's the whole idea. We're trying to improve and help kids.
And I think Steve and I have seen a lot of those students who have had those 504 plans who also wanted to move past it as well. And so thoughtfully doing so is what a caring teacher does.
And when you say to a student, let's try this, and I don't think you need that. Those words can be life-changing.
I don't think you need that. Yeah.
Yeah.
They can be absolutely life-changing. Those are words they'll remember forever. They're not going to remember forever, you know what, don't turn in your homework, or don't worry about this, or I got you. They're not going to remember that. They may remember that you let them down, that they wish you would have held them to higher standard. So I think that there's we always have compassion, always compassion for kids and the people we work with, for sure, 100%, always. But compassion is holding kids accountable and protecting the rights of everyone in the classroom to learn and enjoy being there.
Well, thank you, Michael Linsin, for coming back on and visiting about this. Your blog post really caught us and caught our listeners, and we're so glad that you very quickly, just within a couple of days, just jumped on with us to talk about it further, because this is a great conversation. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I love talking to both of you guys, and the last podcast was great, and so anytime you ask, I'll be here.
Thanks for listening to Music Ed Insights.
We're supported by Group Dynamic, a leading provider of youth leadership workshops. Alan works with dozens of schools each year to help develop their leaders. Learn more at groupdynamic.net/youth-leadership.
Or you can email me at alan@groupdynamic.net. Also sponsored by the Co-College Music Education Program. They've got a website too.
Just click their link at our website or email me at shanley@coe.edu.
Also, The Normal Design, helping normal companies and people create memorable, meaningful, and professional designs and branding. More at thenormaldesign.com.
And Winterset Websites, website design and maintenance. wintersetwebsites.com.
Our Facebook page is Music Ed Insights.
Our website has program notes, links, and a one-page download of this episode's key takeaways. That's musicedinsights.com.
New episodes generally drop every couple weeks on Monday.
Get current.
Stay relevant.
Music Ed Insights.